Mr. President, on a matter that I hope to address today, a separate matter from that, I rise to speak today about improving and modernizing the Endangered Species Act. The Endangered Species Act became a law in this country 52 years ago, 1973. And it came to be a law for the right reasons. But what we know is since then, Washington bureaucrats have added over 2,400 species of plants as well as animals to the list. And of those 2,400, only 54 species have ever left the list. Just 54 species out of over 2,000 in 52 years. Mr. President, you know I'm a doctor, I'm a surgeon, I practiced orthopedic surgery in Casper, Wyoming for over 20 years. As a doctor, if I put 100 patients on life support and only 3 recovered, I'd lose my license. And that's what's happening with the Endangered Species Act. Only 3% of those that were put on the list have ever come off. So why do we accept this level of failure with the Endangered Species Act? When it became law, it was a bipartisan vote. People thought it was a good idea to save endangered species. And the law has done good work to save species from extinction. We've seen the great work being done. The grizzly bear has come back from the brink of extinction. The bald eagle, when the grizzly bear was listed in 1975, 50 years ago, we're down to 136 grizzly bears. The federal government set an ambitious goal. They said, we want to make sure we can get to 500. We think that's the safe version. Go from 136, get back up to 500. And of course, the grizzly bears are Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming, areas around that. Well, Mr. President, today there are over 1,000 grizzly bears in the Yellowstone area. From 136 to the 500, blew right back there. Now there are over 1,000. But the grizzly bear is still on the list. So the law worked in terms of getting the recovery. It identified a species in danger. It helped them recover. But the law was also intended to protect species so well that they no longer need protection. So it's time to get them off the list. The law was never intended to put something on the list and leave them there forever. It'd be like a doctor leaving a patient in intensive care, even though they've gotten better. Time to discharge them from the hospital. But that's not what's happening today. The grizzly bear remains listed. Why? After going from 136 to the 500 they said would be the really good number, now to double that to 1,000? Well, they're trapped in a bureaucracy, the bureaucracy of Washington, D.C. and the courts, because the Endangered Species Act is being weaponized by environmental activists and extremists. Even the Washington Post editorial board agrees. The editorial board argued this month, the Washington Post editorial, which is no real friend of conservatives, it says, it has become difficult to delist a species even after it has met its recovery goal. Why? It says, due to threats of litigation. That's what's happening. The activist judges and activist environmental extremists do everything they can to prevent things from coming off the list, even species that are fully recovered. The Washington Post is right. The Endangered Species Act and law is broken. So to fix it, the editorial board calls for what they describe as a cooling off period for lawsuits, while states like Wyoming monitor recovered species. I actually introduced legislation to that effect in the past. Now the Washington Post says it's a good idea. I think Congress should listen. So this week, Senator Cynthia Lummis of Wyoming, Congresswoman Harriet Hageman, and I sent a letter to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service with our colleagues from Montana and Idaho. Because Montana and Idaho border Yellowstone National Park, parks of the park are in those states. The great preponderance of Yellowstone is in Wyoming, borders in the areas. But the grizzly bears don't understand the barriers of the park. They go beyond the barriers. They're out in communities. They're impacting schools, they're impacting families, they're impacting livestock and wildlife. And we're calling on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to reverse last-minute interference that now has happened from the Biden administration that punishes states like Wyoming and Idaho and Montana for successfully managing the full recovery of the grizzly bear. It's a federal boondoggle. We need to return the management of the recovered grizzly bears to the states where it belongs. And this is not meant to be a partisan issue, it's a practical one. Wyoming has spent more than $50 million to help the grizzly bear's recovery. Our state has changed our laws in order to meet federal standards to manage species after they're removed from the list. Our state management agencies continue to be in the field every day. They're working to protect the grizzly bears and other wildlife. Wyoming's good work and sound management practices have proven to be very successful. The numbers tell the story. 136 grizzly bears to 500 and now to 1,000. But when you keep the grizzly bears under Washington's control, it hurts people in communities all around Wyoming and in Montana and in Idaho. Homeowners face bears in their backyards, and these are killer bears. Self-defense against the bears risks prosecution. Farmers and ranchers are losing livestock. We should be able to protect our family and our property in Wyoming. The Endangered Species Act is a very important law. It needs to be improved. It needs to be updated. It needs to be modernized. The Endangered Species Act was last amended in 1988, 37 years ago. Even the U.S. Constitution was amended more recently than the Endangered Species Act. Both Democrat and Republican administrations in the past have acted to delist the grizzly bear. Yet in another case of midnight meddling, the Biden administration relisted the grizzly bear in January, right before they headed out the door, once again kissing up to the environmental extremists. This is also the continued problem of lawfare from environmental groups who engage in venue shopping for partisan liberal judges. And they can always find one. Wyoming shouldn't need Washington's permission to protect our land, to protect our people, to protect our wildlife, and to protect our way of life. So I'm going to continue to work closely, Mr. President, with the Interior Secretary, Doug Burgum, to empower the states to manage the recovered grizzly bear, because it's time for Wyoming, not Washington, to be in charge of managing this fully recovered species. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.